Hello, everybody. Welcome to a brand new episode of Almost in Agreement. I got Amelia Parker sitting in with me today. As you guys know, we did a special show last week with the ACLU TN. Talked about some of the stuff that KPD is doing here in town, and wanted to follow up with Amelia since she is working on putting some of these this policy in place to give us, the community, the opportunity to have a little bit of oversight on what surveillance equipment KPD uses, how they get to use it, when they get to use it, and maybe even how much they're spending on it. But that's that. AlmostInAgreement.com. Early election or early voting for the city races that started this week already. If you haven't done so and you want to do early voting, now's the time. Go to almostinagreement.com/cityelections21 to get some more information on the candidates, as well as links to Knox County Election Commission and KGIS to double check some of those different things. Facebook, Twitter, YouTube. Hit us up. Website almostinagreement.com has all the episodes available there, as well as your favorite podcast provider. Give us a like, share, friend, follow, request, subscribe, retweet. We need your help. Here we go. Hi, Amelia. How are you?
I'm good. How are you doing?
Oh, like I said, we were getting school started, getting crazy. Tried to watch that school board meeting last night. Was watching your guys' meeting earlier in the week. And just as continues overwhelmed with the massive amount of information and confusion with it. So we touched base because I wanted to follow up on the ACLU thing I did last week. But before we get on that, I want to talk just a little bit about the meeting I was watching Monday. Is how much do you think the procedural rules get in the way of having real conversation?
Well, it all depends on who's leading the meeting. If you think about the school board, they also use Robert's Rules of Order to for their meetings. But they tend to have more time for discussion. They might have different board rules in place than other bodies. The city council has their own rules in place. And there are things in place such as, council members are only allowed to speak on an issue, one or two times during the meeting for a limited amount of time. And so those types of rules limit discussion and make it more difficult. I think they're unnecessary. Because
I agree with that. Because I think one of the things that's weird is, I guess one of my big assumptions is that usually most of the work really gets done in work session. So, like again, using the school board example last night with a giant public forum session. I mean, I guess an easier way to ask the question is, how many times do you think a public forum has changed an opinion of a council person or a board member? Maybe, I guess the easy way to ask that would be, has there been a time where you've gone into a meeting with a certain agenda item and had a public forum section change your mind on it?
Okay. I have two answers to that. One is the way public forums structured at city council, it doesn't allow us an opportunity always to hear from the public unless they know to tell Will Johnson, who works with the city council office, that they want to speak to a specific issue. And so then we will hear from them. Otherwise, our public forum is at the end of the meeting. But if they do that, it can influence my decision, definitely. I have seen public forum influence decisions, especially at the school board. One recently was involved Project Rad. When funding for Project Rad was going to be cut, there were, oh my goodness, over 80 public speakers who had signed up. I can't remember the exact number anymore, but I know that had a large impact on the school board's decision. So I've seen it happen. Okay. But not always. It's not always effective.
Right. Because, I mean, that's the thing is, like, especially when you get one like last night where it, at least before I gave up counting, it seemed like it was 1-1. So it wasn't like you were almost having a democratic process where you got a head count of who was where on what issue. But even if you did, it was fairly even anyway. And so again, yeah, as you know me, I like the process. I like to try to understand these things a little better because I feel like there's so many times I'm watching them and then there's like a pause in the conversation to make sure we're following the Roberts rules correctly as far as are we on topic. Because specifically with your city meeting Monday, I was tuning in, there was that portion where there was the kind of dead end street conversation where there was, are we going to give it back to these people or not? And the conversation went to, hey, here's a solution that everybody wins with. But that wasn't the actual agenda item under discussion. Right. And so then we had to walk ourselves backwards to what are we doing today to then therefore make it to this, agreed upon everybody wins situation for the next meeting. And so like those kind of things as a layperson I get real lost in because it's like, hey, there's a solution, let's do it. But that's not what the agenda item was. So it's a little hard to follow.
And it can be hard to follow. I do appreciate those discussions. And we have had discussions like that cut short before because it wasn't the item on our agenda. But since we don't have a working meeting, like county commission, school board, where we can discuss issues and then get the right thing on the agenda that we want to deal with, then we have to use that meeting time to discuss it so folks can go back, fix it, and then bring it back to us the way we need it to be. So.
Okay, well, that makes sense. I was unaware that the city didn't have a work session like the county and the board does. So that's an interesting little tidbit of knowledge to add to my library of madness that I'm working on right now. Okay, so like I said, you'd kind of pushed the ACLU towards me going into the webinar last week. And I really appreciate you doing that. That was helpful. And I very much enjoyed it. It's very much in line with things that I think are problematic, that I think are quite often overlooked. I'd be curious to start with, and I guess I should ask them this as well. Was there any other media outlet that you pushed them to that you thought would give them the time of day to have a discussion on this?
I did. I don't remember which ones, but mostly when and the ACLU asked for who in the community, should we reach out to, who should be a part of this discussion. And they sent me a list of organizations that they were already in touch with, and they had a really good list of organizations. And then I want to make sure that folks know about local media options and not just the major media outlets. So that's just something I always do. Connect them.
Well, nonetheless, I appreciate it. And because there's part of that to me that brings up the question of, did ACLU reach out to a WBIR or even the Compass or one of those guys, and they didn't bother with the story on it because reason X, Y, or Z.
You would have to ask them, but I'm pretty sure they sent a press release to all media outlets in Knoxville.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, so then let's get into it. So the ACLU thing I find fascinating. I'm pretty much 100% on board with the action items that are problems. And I do like the solution passed. So again, in the structure part of things, because you know me, I like structure. How do you go about getting this to city council? Remember the enact cops C oversight? I can't remember what the term was that they were using for the policy that they were trying to get, that you are helping try to put at least in front of city council for discussion.
Yeah, community control of police surveillance.
Okay.
CCOPS.
CCOPS. See, I knew it was COP something. Okay, and so just process-wise, not as much of the of that. You have an issue that you want to put in front of the city council. What's the process for you from now until we get it on the agenda?
And just a heads up, you are breaking up a little bit, so I don't know if I'm breaking up on your end. But let me go through the process.
Okay. So,
the process could simply be that I write the ordinance and put it on the agenda. For a city council person to put something on the agenda, we just send it to the city council attorney, and it goes on the agenda. But of course, I want to see if we can begin the discussion with the community and also with the administration to bring forward an ordinance that will have broad support. So far in the community, with those I've spoken with, there tends to be support. And, there are obviously questions. Like I mentioned during the webinar with the ACLU, there are some in the community have concerns, and there are some in the community who see these new surveillance tools as an opportunity, but they just want more information. And so I see this ordinance as giving us a process to make the acquisition of this new technology more transparent, and an ability for community members to have a say in how this technology is used. Let's see. I have reached out to the administration and shared a draft of an ordinance that I would like to introduce, and they have raised concerns. And their main concern that they've raised is that this is a shift away from how the city government has historically functioned. And they feel that the charter outlines clear executive responsibilities that could be infringed upon with the passing of this ordinance. And so, that is because the ordinance requires KPD to come before City Council to request permission to use the new surveillance equipment, and it asks KPD for a written plan detailing what the equipment is, how it will be used, where it will be used, and how they'll ensure that the civil liberties of our residents will not be infringed upon by using this. There should be limitations on how data is stored, how long it's stored for, what it's used for. Is there a warrant involved in the use of this information? Who is it being shared with? What other agencies, etc.? This should be information that residents in Knoxville have access to, there's been a larger fight, I would say, in the state around traffic cameras that catch, speeding drivers. And there's been pushback on whether that is allowed in Tennessee. But at least residents want to know where they're located. And I've lived here. I've lived in the DC area where there are also these cameras catching speeders, and the residents are always notified where these cameras are. It is not a hidden tool that police use. And so I feel like that same concept can be applied to a broader selection of surveillance technology. But I've now been given the heads up by the administration that this is going to be a tougher conversation than I was hoping.
Okay, so if I'm understanding correctly, what you're saying is that the mayor's office could put something like this in place where KPD would need the mayor's permission, but in the charter, it's reading like that is under the purview of the mayor's office, not under the purview of the council.
That is what the administration is arguing. Yes.
Okay, because again, that's something that's been discussed kind of in a number of ways around the city government's kind of structure, as far as how it's very mayor heavy and that kind of thing. And so I find that an interesting little sub point to this, because for me, of the list of things, I don't want to know they exist, because I don't want them to exist. That's where I'm on it. I don't see how any of the dragnet versions of these things have any equatable value to the cost of what it is infringing on me as just a guy. I'm just a guy going around town doing my thing. And now I'm specifically in a weird spot because I'm a county resident, so I have no technical voice on this anyway. But for work and my business and stuff like that, I spend probably 90% of my time in the city limits anyway. And so it's one of those weird isms of why I always bring up my Metro conversation, which is not what I'm trying to do today, but just the idea that that this is something that the city can't, the charter is not even allowing the council to have oversight on, regardless of the mayor's office or KPDs. Because I think that's one of the things that I like. I like having a police force that is very locally obligated to the local government versus the sheriff's office, who's really only obligated to his next election and or whatever the state law puts in place for him. And so I like this puts a big weird tear in a lot of different stuff that I'm trying to wrap my head around, as far as the way the city government works, regardless of the police department, I suppose.
Right.
Because again, go ahead.
Yeah. Well, I was just going to say, to your point, for those who are just outright opposed to the surveillance technology, currently we just have no space for those residents' voices to be heard to object to it.
Right.
If, KPD and the mayor have ultimate authority and there's no say from, city council, which is much more accountable to the voting public.
Right. And much more accessible to the voting public as well. Because again, I think it's one of those where, there may have been one point in time where this made sense, that the way things are operating were the most logical and most efficient and most X, Y, or Z. But as technology has changed, as the city has grown, all these different pieces, I'm a bit, I don't know. The more I think about it, the more I don't know that I'm 100% that we need to go Metro, but we really need to look at how we do what we do and if this is the right and best way moving forward, whether it's to go Metro or to restructure some of the things. Because I all the city candidates I've been talking to with this election coming up, that's one of the things that kind of keeps re-popping up is this, well, we do some stuff, but we don't do a lot. The mayor really gets to do what the mayor wants to do, and we're just kind of on board for the ride. And, we can use the platform to voice our objections and to try to make sure that certain things are happening out in the open. But at the end of the day, if the mayor wants it, the mayor gets it, and the rest of us are just kind of on board. And so I don't like that part of what's going on there either. And so I don't know, that specific fact kind of derails kind of where I was heading, because I was going to get it. Well, because I was going to get into, because you said there were some speed bumps or some, questions that were coming up. But I mean, that one question of where the authority lies kind of takes everything else out of the conversation. Because I was going to be curious on what are some things that people have questions about inside, the specific issues. Well, those are kind of secondary if we can't even get this thing rolling in the first place. So other than a charter amendment, what's the next step in trying to get this moving forward?
Well, I'm not necessarily accepting their interpretation of the charter. So I've reached out to my own legal help to get their opinion on whether the charter limits city council's ability, because other cities in the state with a strong mayor system have also passed this ordinance. So I believe some version of it could be passed in the city of Knoxville. We just need to get some clarity first around this charter issue.
Right. Okay. Because again, because as we move into it, one of the things that in my discussion directly with them, as well as my hanging on for the webinar part of it, is there was, how do I word this? Well, there was a lot of discussion about the racial disparity part of it, which I acknowledge to probably be 100% factual. I'm not trying to dispute the facts and the history of it and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. But for me watching it, I don't know how much that helps the cause. I think it's a value point to be part of the conversation. It needs to be clarified and it needs to be out there. But I'm afraid for my sake of it, that's not the right way to put it. For the way I see it, I guess I feel like it detracts from the main point of it. The race part doesn't matter. It's that this is a violation of everybody's rights, and we need to underscore that part of it. And I guess that's one of the things where I don't know exactly how to talk about it, other than to say that it kind of became a distraction for me. It's like, I'm on board, or either way. I don't like the idea that these things are happening without our knowledge. I don't like where these things lead as the technology continues to grow and get more complicated and get more sophisticated, especially in some of the body cam facial things that are in the future that aren't quite ready yet, but that do exist in some places that will probably come along with these same kind of things. I guess that's one of the things that gets me hung up in the whole thing is it's not that it's not important. I just feel like a lot of times in the conversation, it ends up becoming the main reason, which I don't think is what, at least in my opinion, what needs to be highlighted on it. It needs to be highlighted that whether you're black, brown, white, anything, these are the universals that we were supposed to all get. And while, yes, people of color tend to get targeted more with some of these technologies, at the end of the day, it doesn't matter which part of town you live in, doesn't matter which color skin you have, doesn't matter your income bracket, these things aren't okay. And I guess that's one of the things for me that I get lost in. And again, and we've had conversations on race before, and I always get kind of about it because I'm not trying to be insensitive to anybody's situation. I'm just trying to understand where things that we agree on, I always get afraid that the racial part becomes a takeaway instead of the point, I guess. I don't know. I didn't word that well. I apologize.
Well, I mean, I think it's just a part. I mean, if it's something that doesn't motivate you, I think it is a part that you can ignore, honestly, because I think what the ACLU is doing is trying to share their concerns with the community, which obviously the overarching concern are the potential civil liberty infringements that could come from this technology and the implementation of the technology. But I also think that it's important when they're presenting this, or I mean, I can't speak for them, but I think, from my perspective, when I'm presenting this ordinance and the reason why I want to bring it forward, it's important to understand that overarching issue, but also it's important to understand that some folks in the community might not be experiencing a growth in surveillance tools around them because they're not from a racial minority group or a lower income class. And so folks who live in public housing, KCDC housing in Knoxville, saw cameras go up around their residents, years ago, multiple years ago.
And to ACLU's point, how much has that changed? What's been going on this year?
Right. So I think what they're trying to say, though, right. And we also see this this video still that has been released in the recent shooting, and that's from, I believe, a KCDC camera. But you can't get that much information from it. You can just see that there's a lot of people there. And so we also don't want folks to have a false sense of security with these cameras going up. We need to understand really how they're being used and what they're useful for. And then, I'm somewhat in agreement with you that I do not want a big surveillance state. And we already have a technology. If you can get the warrant for a serious crime that has happened, usually it has to rise to the level of, an act of terrorism or something, but you can tap into, a local police department can get access to surveillance footage and work with different levels of law enforcement.
Right, because that's one of my takeaways from the ACLU conversation. It's like, well, if this is what KPD has negotiated with Amazon for the Blink system, or this is the level of camera systems that the cruisers can have with the scanning technology on the license plates that KPD can afford, what does the FBI have? And that's a whole nother level, and that's above our pay grade as far as local conversation goes. But if this is what we're getting locally, what's happening on the state and national level with those organizations and the funding and technology that they have? That's what scares me about it, because I'm assuming that KPD is the least capable to afford and utilize these technologies as compared to the TBI or the FBI, for example. And so it's like, if we're okay with the little one doing it, I'm only assuming that the bigger ones have bigger and better versions. And so again, it's the rabbit hole as well as the reality to me. It's like, this is where these things go. This is just the beginnings. Well, this is probably a midpoint, and more realistically, this is a midpoint of where they could go from where I believe we're supposed to be, in that, the idea of surveillance is without a warrant specifically. Like, I'm totally on board with, we have reasonable suspicion that this person is doing this thing, and we are going to surveil them either physically with an officer or an undercover agent, or we're going to install a camera system or some sort of, like they do in the movies all the time, the van out on the street with all the cameras and the microphones in it and that kind of stuff. Like, I'm perfectly okay with that premise of it when it is designed and specific because they have a suspect in mind. It's when I'm just a guy going down the street and I'm treated like a suspect, even though I'm just a regular citizen. That's the line to me that I don't think people think about enough. And again, like, my dad's the worst of it all. He's like, well, I'm not doing anything wrong, so it doesn't matter. And it's like, well, today you're not doing anything wrong, because what happens when what happens when the definition of wrong changes to something that you don't agree with, and now all of a sudden you are doing something wrong.
Or your behavior starts to show a pattern that they find suspicious, and it lines up with something else that they're investigating, and they decide that you're that suspicious individual that they've been looking for. But all you're doing is walking back and forth. You're doing your afternoon walks on Mondays from 2 to 3.
Right, but you're walking by the state building every time, and they're like,
right, every day they come by the state building. Why is that?
Right. Yeah, but even with that, there's at least a conscious conversation about there's something going on. We want to look at it, instead of it being, oh, our camera system noticed this guy over and over again, and now we're going to look into it a little further because the camera system tells us so. And the camera system doesn't care. It doesn't think about it critically. It just runs the stats out. Okay. Well, I'm really disappointed about this mayor part of it. I was hoping it was going to be more of the substantive issues that were the speed bumps, not a structural issue. So.
Yeah, we didn't even get into much of the substance. I'm trying to think of anything else any other issues that were raised. But no, we didn't even get a chance to get into the substantive issues because they feel that it would be inappropriate. I mean, they also did say that that the ordinance would essentially wait, let me look at the exact language. It would they said the surveillance technology is critical to KPD's ability to deter and respond to crime in our community, and that the proposed ordinance would significantly threaten the city's ability to keep people safe in Knoxville. That was their response.
Read that again for me. I want to make sure that that's clear and at least twice on the record so I can understand it.
So they said that technology-based tools and processes, including types specifically referenced in my ordinance, are critical to KPD's ability to deter and respond to crime in our community. We feel the proposed ordinance is inappropriate given charter-defined executive functions and would significantly threaten the city's ability to keep people safe in Knoxville.
Okay, and that's from the mayor's office?
Yes.
Okay. My first pick at that, just on the surface, would be the ordinance is not saying you're not allowed to have or use these things. It's just that you need to tell us about it and we need to be aware of it.
Yep.
So they're not even addressing the initial question. Like, again, I can get on at least understanding the function part of the way the charter's set up and this, that, and the other being problematic for the process of what we're trying to do. But again, that goes to the ACLU's point. It goes to, I mean, I said it a little like tongue in cheek earlier, but we have this camera system that was on and working at the time of this last shooting, where this most recent, sadly, it's 6 this year,
6,
Austin East kids. that have been victims of violence, and it's like, well, you have it, and how effective is it? It's not, but you're leaning on, we need it to be effective. It's like, well, you're not being effective with it. So you can't use a false statement as your reasoning behind it. Again, I can understand where they can hide behind the charter part of it. I get that. But then to say that part where it helps, I don't know. I guess we can't disprove the positive because we don't have the information to see how many things that they've stopped because of systems they have. Is that a report that they'd be willing to file? Could you ask for that?
Say that again. You want a report?
Could you ask for could you show evidence that you guys have stopped a number of things through the surveillance technology in question? I mean, they're not going to answer it. I know the answer already, but like, you're telling me that you need this because it's effective for you guys. Can you show me proof of effectiveness?
That will definitely be a follow-up question. Yes.
I mean, yeah, but they're not going to answer it. We know that.
I mean, I even asked for their current policies on surveillance tech that they're using, and they just pointed me to where KPD's policies are housed.
Because another question I had, and you are probably able to access this or have access to this, is how much are they spending on? Because we had this whole budget conversation.
And here's the other thing I learned recently. We only track the funding used for KPD from the city funds, right? KPD has around $10 million in grants that do not go through the city budget that we do not track or monitor. And so if they buy surveillance technology through that grant funding that doesn't come through city council, we would be none the wiser. So that is a question I have, but I don't have the information. I'll have to follow up. You still there?
Sorry, I put my driving mode on accident.
Oh, gotcha.
I don't know how this thing. All right. I don't know where to go from here. There we are.
That's my update. That's all I got for now. But I'll have more soon. I'm going to keep working on this. Okay.
Well, I appreciate your time. I'll do some work on this. I'll put it together and I'll get it out. It's information nonetheless. It's not what I wanted to hear, but it works. So I appreciate you, and I'll be back in touch because I'm pretty hot on this topic.
Okay. Sounds good.
All right. Amelia, I appreciate you. Have a great afternoon.
No problem. You too.
See,
Bye.
It's weird. It's a little bit disconcerting that basically the mayor's office and KPD basically said, nope, that's not in your purview as a city councilor. This isn't something we're going to give you. So suffice to say, I'm a little disappointed with that conversation, not on Amelia's part, just on the outcome as it stands now. We're going to, as she mentioned, we're going to keep working on it, looking on it, seeing what can be done. And for what it's worth, we'll keep it going. And as action items become available, we'll let you know what those are. As mentioned in the intro, City Race is up and running. Primary early voting has started. Go to your early voting locations now. But before you do that, go to almostinaagreement.com/cityelections21. That'll give you a quick breakdown, at least get you some information so you're a little bit more knowledgeable as a voter. We're almostinagreement@gmail.com. Find us on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. Go to our website, almostinaagreement.com, and get all the episodes there, as well as on all major podcast providers. While you're at these places, please like, share, retweet, friend, subscribe, whatever the term is, whatever the thing is that lets the provider know that you're listening to us. It helps to get the word out. Thanks, everybody. Have a great afternoon.